Hey, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm really happy to be here. It's nice seeing you all, and I'm looking forward to meeting more of you. So I'm Danny McClure. I'm with the Lahontan Region Water Quality Control Board. Here's an overview of my presentation. First, I'll provide some background information on who our agency is and what we're doing in this area. Then I'm going to talk about a little bit about West Fork Carson water quality, and then I'll talk about the West Fork Carson Vision plan and then next steps in the development of the plan, and I'll leave some time at the end for questions and discussion. So not to bore you all with all the details here, but I want to just provide a little context. So the name of the agency I work for is it's a state of California agency called the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Lahontan Region, shortened to Lahontan Water Board. So we're one of 9 California water boards that are under the State Water Resource Control Board. We're region 6 on this map. So I don't know if you can see it, but it's the blurb on the far right on the east side of the state. So we're most of the eastern portion of the state in this area, starting at the crest of the Sierra to the state line. And so our responsibility is to protect water quality. We implement the Federal Clean Water Act, as well as a state equivalent known as Port Cologne in the California Water Code. And we have a water quality control plan or a basin plan that has our water quality standards in it, as well as a program of implementation. So we regulate discharges to surface water and groundwater and monitor and assess water quality. And then we also implement grants and coordinate with other agencies and stakeholders to protect water quality. One of the main mandates we implement is Clean Water Act Section 303D. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but it's a section of the Clean Water Act requires us states to develop a 303D list, is what it's called, of water bodies that are impaired or not meeting standards. It's updated for our region about every 6 years. And for those water bodies, a TMDL is required. A TMDL is a total maximum daily load, where the allowable amount of pollutant the water body can assimilate and still meet standards is determined, and then that's allocated among the sources. So those are established in our basin plan through an extensive public regulatory development process, and that'll include implementation requirements for all the significant sources. So for several years, states were mostly focused with our 303D resources on developing TMDLs, and in 2013, EPA began working with the states and state water quality control agencies, and they wanted to kind of expand the scope to allow us to do some other things beyond just traditional TMDL development with those resources. So they came out with what was called the EPA Vision, Clean Water Act Section 303D Vision. There's the full name, the Long-Term Vision for Assessment, Restoration, and Protection under Clean Water Act Section 303D program. That came out in December 2013. So this was not a new rule or regulation, but it was published by EPA, where they established goals for states for prioritizing, assessing, protecting water quality, TMDL alternatives, and engagement and integration. So 2 of the main goals that are relevant, especially notable here, is a goal for states to establish protection priorities to prevent additional impairments. And then also the goal for the use of TMDL alternatives where better suited to meet water quality goals. So states identified priority water bodies and watersheds in 2015, and then these plans are due to be completed by 2022. So we're scrambling to finish our plans right now. And so the Lahontan Water Board identified 2 of these. One is Bishop Creek, and the other is for the West Fork Carson River, and these are both TMDL alternatives. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about West Fork Carson water quality. I don't have time to get into great deal of detail. And before I get into, and I'm going to talk about some of the West Fork Carson water quality impairments where standards aren't being met. But before I say that, first of all, I say that generally, West Fork Carson is pretty good water quality relative to a lot of other water bodies I've worked on, especially. But the Lahontan Water Board has fairly protective water quality standards in our basin plan. And so there's exceedances of those standards. So here we have the impairments to water quality. And these are, things that can have significant impacts, especially, downstream. So there's on this map, I should have made it bigger, but there's, you can see the highways in red, 88 and 89, the state lines in the upper right corner. The black dots are 3 monitoring sites. And then you can see 3 different segments of the river. There's one in like an orange and then a blue and then a purple. So going bottom left to top right is upstream to downstream. So for this first segment from the headwaters to Hope Valley, that's where we're just hearing about, that's going through Faith Valley there, and that goes through to the downstream end of Hope Valley. We have impairments for nitrates, various forms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfates. Then starting at Pickett's Junction, right where 88 and 89 come together, basically is the next segment, which is Hope Valley to Woodford's. So there we have impairments for chloride, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfates, totodissolved solids or salts, and turbidity. And then finally, the final segment starts at the Woodford's Bridge and goes to the state line. And there we have impairments for indicator bacteria, iron, nitrogen, sulfates, totodissolved solids, and turbidity. I should mention we are in the process of updating our indicator bacteria standard and looking at it by the new standard that's actually on much more current science. That indicator bacteria impairment will likely go away when we update that standard because it's not exceeding the newer standard. So those are the water quality issues that we have on the West Fork Carson. And so potential sources we've identified, one this was kind of just discussed recently was historical activities is a major source. There's been a lot of grazing, logging, and channel degradation from the historical activities, also road maintenance, septic tanks, grazing, recreational activities, hydrologic modification, and other things like climate change and fire can also contribute. And these, most of these contribute via runoff from non-point source runoff. So the reason this was chosen as a vision project, we have a pretty good data set. We also, there's a lot of public stakeholder involvement, including this group, Alpine Watershed Group, and others. There's restoration projects underway, and there's already been substantial planning documents and assessment documents completed. One notable is the Carson River Adapted Stewardship Plan, but many other assessment documents have also been completed. And so it was determined that this would be appropriate for a TMDL alternative approach to try to, and the idea is that there's a good chance we'll be able to attain standards without going through having to develop a TMDL. The other goal was to complete a 9-element watershed plan, which is having those 9 elements accepted will then make non-point source pollution control projects in the watershed eligible for Clean Water Act Section 319 grant funds. So here's the elements of an EPA 9-element watershed plan. And it's basically identify the sources, estimate the reductions, and describe the reductions needed and describe practices to achieve those reductions, and then things to make those happen, such as the technical and financial assistance needed, and an education component, and then a schedule for making that all happen, including milestones, and then identifying indicators to measure the progress and monitoring of water quality. So since I was talking to CWSD and Carson River stakeholders, I wanted to just talk a little bit about how we see this fitting in with the Carson River Adaptive Stewardship Plan. So the Carson River Adaptive Stewardship Plan was EPA approved as a watershed plan for Nevada, but not California. So Nevada can get 319 grant funds, California can't for this project, for this area. So EPA said that, has noted that there's needed additional specifics for California, such as identifying and describing the sources, the reductions needed, listing in detail more of the current projects and the extent of the management measures and assistance needed, a schedule, and then performance indicators and milestones and monitoring to assess progress. So the idea for the vision plan was for California to address those needed specifics and have a plan to attain standards in the West Fork Carson. And the idea for that is that it will be a companion to the Carson River Plan. And then the vision, what we're envisioning for West Fork Carson stakeholders is to address current sources. We're envisioning that they'll look at the land uses and practices from a water quality perspective and plan and implement practices to reduce their potential impacts, and work with resource specialists such as NRCS, UC Cooperative Extension, watershed groups, and seek grant funding assistance to do that. And then for the historical impacts, we're envisioning that the restoration projects will continue to address those. And we really want this plan to be both proactive and synergistic. So things that help prevent future impairments, tapping into that protective element of the EPA vision, and then also synergistic with other projects going on in the watershed. And then finally, for stakeholders, also, the vision is that they'll provide information to help inform the board's adaptive management. So in terms of what the Lahontan Water Board itself will be doing, we'll be addressing all the controllable sources, and the vision is for that to be implemented through our existing water quality programs. So we've got various permitting programs, and then for the rest, kind of our catch-all is our non-point source program. And we're going to continue engagement, coordination, and technical assistance and support grants for the identified projects in the plan. And then we're going to continue, and also with the assistance of Alpine Watershed Group and others, to monitor water quality, and then the board will assess the implementation progress versus the milestones. So we're envisioning that would happen probably in 5 and 10 years, and the plan would be to be attaining standards within 10 years. And then the board will continue, adaptive management, seeing how progress is going, how implementation is going, and how water quality, to see if there needs to be any adjustment in our approach. So this plan, just to go a little about the development of the plan, it was identified as a priority in 2015. There's some groundwork done in 2017 through 2020. And then Alpine Watershed Group hosted 4 stakeholder forums in 2020 through 2022, discussing roads and water quality, restoration, recreation, and then just had one this month on grazing. And those recordings are all available online at the AWG website. They're all very informative. So next steps in development of the vision plan, we're wrapping up development of it through May. There's also, we're working with AWG and others for a potential ranch tour in summer 2022. There will be a draft release to the public, and we really want to hear from everybody, especially people who know the watershed and the practices better than we do during that review period. So this summer, June through July 2022, and we'll incorporate all that feedback and then be presented to our board in September 2022, and then submitted to EPA and then implemented. And then, as I mentioned in my last slide, as it's implemented, we'll continue to look at water quality and the practices being implemented to be able to inform any adaptive management. Here are some contacts that I'm sure you can't read, so I won't get any calls. But this slide though does have there's our website. There's also a story map that has some of the water quality data and mapping in a pretty cool format, and then the Alpine Watershed Group website on the project. So that concludes my presentation. I'll just leave it up with the picture of the West Fork Carson